stolen away. Across the vast lands of Hyrule, strange rifts have appeared and have taken many people, including Link. Now alone, Zelda meets the fairy Tri, receives a mysterious staff called the Tri-Rod, and sets off on a journey across Hyrule to save her kingdom. By waving the Tri-Rod at a table she found, Zelda learned how to create an imitation of it called an echo. Once you learn an echo of something, you can recreate it whenever you'd like. Even if there's a wall blocking your path, you can create echoes of tables to get a leg up. Just like that. You can create wooden boxes, old beds, and unusual things like water blocks. How you use them separately or together is entirely up to you. Learn and create echoes of things you find while exploring Hyrule. You might be surprised at what you discover. Even battles will look different. You could pick up and throw a rock echo, for example. That's not all, though. You can also create echoes of monsters. After doing so, they'll fight by your side. Monsters have different abilities, so choose the one you want to create based on the situation. Wisdom is key, after all. In a Hyrule without Link, the fate of the kingdom is now in Zelda's hands.
While the gaming industry is filled with similar series that only have superficial differences, Nintendo continues to creatively keep an old franchise fresh. Here, rather than wielding a sword, you'll have to carefully generate reflections of various objects and enemies to solve various environmental puzzles, defeat various enemies in 3D and 2D stages, explore various dungeons, and save the land of Hyrule from a strange creature. Nintendo and Grezzo's latest creation doesn't just put you in the role of Princess Zelda, but it also uses this change to provide a thoughtful and unique gameplay system that challenges the gamer in interesting ways. You probably know that The Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom is the first major installment in the Legend of Zelda series to feature Princess Zelda, not Link, as the main character. After being caught up in a supernatural plot, the princess uses the power of a special fairy-like creature named Tri to escape her prison. She can use her magic wand, the Tri-Rod, to create echoes, or rather, reflections, of all kinds of things. For example, when you first see a certain type of chair, Zelda learns how to make it. Then, when you reach an obstacle, you have to place a chair in front of you, and then 2 chairs on top of the first chair, to effectively have the necessary platforms to jump over and pass the obstacle. Of course, this example only refers to the simplest way you can use the power of echoes. Throughout the game, the creators constantly engage the player's mind by creating challenges that match Zelda's power. You quickly see that each time you have to choose the right tool from the different items you have the ability to make and place it correctly to achieve the result. Then, when you have become a little more confident in yourself, you suddenly find yourself facing more serious enemies. In fact, during the first hour of the new Legend of Zelda experience, the development team lets the player believe that they are dealing with a stealth-oriented experience. But then, as the number of enemies increases, you realize that fighting them will be inevitable. So everything changes when you first manage to defeat an enemy type. You also gain the ability to craft that enemy. In fact, you face 10 different enemy models in the game. Nintendo has often been adamant about not being bound by traditional genre definitions. At first glance, the new Zelda feels like a puzzle-based action-adventure game, but when you play it, you'll sometimes be reminded of other subgenres. For example, in a way that might be reminiscent of strategy games, you have to identify the strengths and weaknesses of different enemies and throw the right enemy or enemies at the enemies in front of you in each situation to keep Zelda alive. This same logical progression of gameplay development and avoidance of repetition is maintained throughout the new Zelda experience. The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom introduces the audience to Zelda's abilities step by step, while challenging them at the same time, without taking up time with a separate tutorial. After an exciting and engaging opening that gets the audience curious about the story of this version of the Legend of Zelda series, you're practically constantly learning the basics of the gameplay for 2 hours. But you almost never feel like the game is holding your hand and telling you what to do step by step. Every now and then you discover new things and have to use the abilities you've acquired to face a challenge that you really have to solve yourself. What's interesting here is that the development team tries to keep the audience entertained with new things, not just in designing the main gameplay mechanics, but in all parts of the game. Increasing the appeal of exploring the map after finding the horse, adding a separate and memorable combat system, excellent use of the combination of 2D and 3D stages, having some stages take place in different worlds, and creating special intellectual challenges in the dungeons are all reasons why The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom succeeds in not becoming repetitive. Challenging the audience's creativity works best when the game developer respects their creativity, so that the gamer doesn't feel like they've wasted their time by taking the time to find a creative way to do something. So how good that The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom succeeds in this area, as expected from The Legend of Zelda, rather than boring the player with countless invisible walls and seemingly complex puzzles that only have one solution. Of course, the player's freedom of action and creativity is not as great as in The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. But Echoes of Wisdom respects the different ways that each of us might think of, both in the main stages and in creating relatively inaccessible sections that we must find our way to, although the rewards for exploring the map could have been better, pushing the player more towards maximum effort to open every single chest and overcome all the environmental challenges. The creator's cleverness in challenging the audience with abilities that are not at all difficult to learn at first is also evident in Zelda's ability to move objects and enemies. Thanks to one of Tri's abilities, you can coordinate the movement of various creatures or objects with Zelda's movement, in such a way that, for example, when you go right, the object will also be pulled to the right. It seems simple, but many times the game's creative use of this ability can really keep the player busy for a few minutes trying to solve a puzzle, especially for each player who is trying to see all the parts of each dungeon and get the maximum echoes and useful items. On the other hand, it's also possible to reverse this relationship. Sometimes the best way to get through a difficult path is to let Zelda move in line with the movement of another object. Want a summary of all this? The game's puzzle design won't disappoint. Except for the times when you encounter some puzzles whose excessive simplicity will appeal to die-hard Zelda fans, it's usually quite clear that beloved Zelda producer Aji Inuma, along with a group of Nintendo game developers, have made essential contributions to Grezzo Studio to deliver a work of the magnitude and stature of the magnificent name of the Zelda series, a work that is both attractive to old players of the series and has the ability to attract new gamers interested in this genre of puzzle-based adventures. Meanwhile, while Zelda's abundance of craftable items is commendable, it's unfortunate that the game overdoes it in presenting them to the audience. You'll likely feel like you only really need some of the craftable items by the middle of the game, and you won't touch some of them for a while. This feeling is even more pronounced when you have to switch between a large number of relatively useless items in the Echoes menu to select each enemy or item. What's the problem? Isn't it that many gamers like to have their hands full using various abilities to overcome challenges? Yes. but many of the echoes that Zelda can produce do nothing to increase the player's options for fighting enemies or overcoming environmental obstacles. In fact, they become weaker and more useless the further you go in the game. One of the most beautiful aspects of the new Legend of Zelda experience for me was taking on various optional challenges in order to acquire the strongest echoes possible. The game made it fun to step into dungeons or take a side quest, because by doing so, I would gain the ability to build a powerful enemy and see the results of that effort in many of the battles ahead. But contrary to the feeling that the gamer gets from such an experience, having additional and unnecessary capabilities simply causes unnecessary clutter in the gameplay, so that the audience feels that the development team created some of them simply to increase the list of echoes that can be built without thinking about the precise use of each item in the game as a whole. In the ideal design of any feature in any video game, there should be a perfect fit between what the gamer is given and what the gamer needs for them. For this reason, Echoes of Wisdom would have achieved a better balance in the level design if it had removed some of the truly rare and removable echoes, because it would no longer impose on the player the same feeling of frustration of being confused about using some rarely used items, confusion that is not as enjoyable as being confused about solving a clever puzzle. When the game was first announced, and especially since it was practically clear that Japanese studio Grezzo was developing the remake of The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening, many thought that Echoes of Wisdom would be a direct sequel. But that's not the case. However, the developers were clearly influenced by Link's Awakening during the game's development, and this influence is not limited to similar graphic modeling and reliance on the same manufacturing technology. Apart from the fact that The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom's appearance clearly reminds us of The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening, their storytelling is also close. Because here too, a story is told that seems to have nothing to do with any of the other versions of the series, at least not directly. Also, the type of story themes and the way the story is told are full of special supernatural elements and special subtextual concepts that can be reminiscent of the storytelling of Link's Awakening. Meanwhile, unfortunately, unlike Link's Awakening, we do not see the full potential of the story being used to immerse the audience in the surreal atmosphere of a strange story. For example, the development team could have used the possibility of talking to many of the townspeople to immerse the gamer more and more in the strange atmosphere created in Hyrule. After all, we are dealing with a story in which we also encounter fake and evil versions of familiar characters. The atmosphere could have been much heavier and more effective, either by relying on better dialogue writing that described the critical situation more concretely for Princess Zelda, or through a more serious and better use of terrifying voice acting. The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom's excellent soundtrack, especially in the finale, conveys a sense of dread to the player. This version of The Legend of Zelda proves its ability to use supernatural horror appropriately during its best story parts, and ironically, the overall mood of the story also requires that the horror of the experience be increased. But for a very large part of the game, the development team maintains a more or less safe distance from these things. The writing also serves more to repeat the same things about the events that happened in the land and does not allow us to immerse ourselves in the horror of the events that have occurred, step by step, from beginning to end. Therefore, although I like the game in terms of story, I often felt that the creators preferred not to go into many details. They did not fully exploit the potential of the work to become one of the most adult versions of The Legend of Zelda. At the same time, the game's narrative experience is far from disappointing. From the strong opening that throws the audience into the heart of the story to the sequences that show how much stranger the story is than they initially imagined with a great plot twist, the exclusive The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom elevated its status as a single-player video game for me. Even the gameplay surprises, some of which this review doesn't mention, are tied to the story and remind us how well-deserved and respectfully placed Princess Zelda as the game's main character was. The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom, while somewhat reminiscent of the world-building of The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past and the kind of visuals from the Link's Awakening remake, manages to stand on its own 2 feet, to the point where, if you ask me, I wouldn't want the first main Zelda game to feature the princess herself as the main character to be the last game in the series. While predictable technical shortcomings, the overly simple nature of a few puzzles, the confusion of the audience due to unnecessary extra features, and the waste of some of the storytelling potential all prevent the work from shining to its full potential. None of that stops Echoes of Wisdom from being a great puzzle-driven action-adventure. If you love the Legend of Zelda series, you shouldn't miss the opportunity to experience the game. If you're not very familiar with the Legend of Zelda series, this is another lovely video game that, along with several other great Zelda games, shows that you should visit Hyrule as soon as possible. Strengths: very good map and dungeon design. Sweet illustrations and pleasant soundtrack. Excellent use of Princess Zelda as the main character. Gives the gamer the freedom to be creative in solving a large number of puzzles. Very good variety in the design of all types of small and large enemies. Weaknesses: not using all the potential of the narrative to create atmosphere and immerse the audience in the story. Providing additional features to the gamer that sometimes have no significant use in most cases.
If you like this video, like it now, and become a member of our family by pressing the subscribe button. Activate the bell so you never miss our interesting videos.